Good evening. I'd like to welcome you all to the organizational meeting of the Granville Exempted Village School District. And I invite you to rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Would you like to call the roll?
Dr. Foreman? Here. Mr. Miller?
Here.
Ms. Deeds?
Here.
Mr. Wolf?
Here.
Ms. Shaw? Here.
Where's Shanice?
He's
He's probably watching.
That's a good way to start 2020. Sounds good.
All right.
Any member of the board may be nominated for president. A second is not necessary. On election, the new president will chair the board. Do I have a nomination for president?
I'd like to nominate Jennifer Clement for board president.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Nominate. Any other nominations? Nominations for board president are closed. Would you like to call the roll?
Dr. Foreman?
Sure, yes.
Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Ms. Kornman is elected president of the Granville Board of Education for 2020.
No, that was just the closing of the motion. So now you have to actually hold the election.
But it says.
There's two votes.
There's two votes. Close the motion and then,
Okay.
yep. So now,
So we need a
Motion to approve.
To approve Jennifer Corman as
Yep.
president for 2020.
Okay. Do I have a second?
second.
Thank you. Would you like to call the roll?
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Dr. Foreman? Ms. Deeds?
Aye. Now, and since I've gummed it up, I'm just going to slide on out.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You.
You did not muck it up.
Yeah.
That's
I
standard
got-
practice
I got
for us,
over
remember?
enthusiasm. It's all good.
Thank you, Amy.
My pleasure. I do.
Okay, and now I would like to take nominations for the election of the board vice president for 2020. Any member of the board may be nominated for vice president. A second is not necessary.
I would like to nominate Mr. Miller as vice president for 2020.
Sure, second. Any other nominations? Nominations are now closed. Take the roll, please.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Foreman?
Aye.
I'd like to
My
make a
agenda
mo-
was stapled poorly, so I
I'd like to make a motion to approve Mr. Wolf as vice president for 2020. Mr. Miller.
Second.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Take the roll, please.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Foreman?
Aye.
Thank you.
Yay.
Both of you, thank you. Okay. Yeah, I can walk through from here. Item 6 is approval of board policies and regulations currently in effect.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, as you know, all we're doing is rolling the board policies and regulations from one year to the this motion.
Any questions? Take a roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Item 7 is the adoption of agenda and meeting notification procedures.
So moved.
Second. Good.
Self-explanatory, just kind of talks a little bit about the organizational meeting that we're in right now, regular meetings, special meetings, and personal notification meetings.
Any questions? Comments? Take a roll, please.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. Next is our list of board members and designees and superintendent committees. We're going to do both in one motion, but we'll just start with the motion and second, and then we can go into discussion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. As you can see, we have a full list of designee assignments, but we left the superintendent committees open. So at this point, we'd like to identify who would like to be a part of what committee, superintendent committees. Just remember, there's a whole child committee that Mr. Durst facilitates, world-class education that Mr. Bernath facilitates, resources and operations that Tanya facilitates, Brittany facilitates the finance committee, and then I facilitate the community committee.
Could you remind us kind of approximately how many meetings there are per year, or what's your expected frequency for these different
Whole
groups?
child is usually, I would say, at least quarterly, if not more, depending on the workload. Ryan, yours is,
We'll have our first one here in about 3 weeks.
okay, so, again, he has a math adoption, so 1 year might be a little bit more than the others. Resources and operations, about quarterly, 3 times a year. Finance,
At least
twice
twice,
with
but
the forecast. Community committee, depends. If we're in a survey year, we can meet a little bit more often, so it could be once or twice.
I would like to continue on the whole child committee, please.
And remember, we can have 2 people on the committee.
I'd like to do whole child as well.
I'd like to stay on the finance committee.
I'd like to continue the finance committee as well.
I'd like to do a world-class education committee.
How often is community meeting?
Very infrequently, so I mean, you can handle it.
Maybe.
Your perspective is good on that committee because you have longevity, not only in the community, but also on the board, so we would appreciate it. Thank you. All right,
I'd like to be on the operations and resource committee as well.
So we have, anybody else that want to double up?
I could do community.
Like, you know, I wanted to give you first.
Okay. So, yeah.
Okay.
You know what, I'd like to do operations and resources as well.
So I'll do world-class.
Okay. All right, so we have whole child, Amy and Fred, world-class ed, Cecile and Jen, operations and resources, Thomas and Fred, finance, Jen and Thomas, and community, Amy and Cecile. Okay?
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Thank you. Appreciate all of your support in board meetings and out of board meetings. Next item is board member compensation at a rate of $50 per hour.
Motion?
So moved.
Second?
Sure.
It seems indelicate, doesn't it?
It seems.
This is just a continuation of the same.
Yes.
as we had back with that.
And
And to that extent, I'd like to make a public comment of what my perspective has been on this in the past, is I've never received compensation as a board member, and will, again, choose not to this year, but I formally write a letter to the treasurer and let him know that I waive my compensation.
Thanks. I'm going to do that also.
Take the roll, please.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Foreman?
Aye.
Thank you. Item 11 is resolution to create service fund.
So moved.
Second.
And if you remember, in 2013, that was around $5,000 after that levy, after the changing the governor's budget, and if we dropped it down to 3,000, we've been hovering right at that level. We looked at it, it's covering the cost of the board for meetings and expenses, so I see no need to increase.
Any other questions? Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Dr. Foreman?
Aye.
Thank you. Item 12 is a resolution to establish board meeting times, dates, and location.
So moved.
Second.
Just call your attention to the fact that July is always to be determined. We typically know mid-June,
But it's usually right before.
but before July 10th, which is the deadline for hire.
Any more questions? Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Dr. Foreman?
Aye.
Thank you. And the next and last item before we adjourn is the standing authorizations for the calendar year.
So moved.
Second.
And all of these standing authorizations, you can read through them. It gives me the ability to hire and accept resignation in between meetings, because sometimes those decisions are not lined up with meeting agendas. You authorize Brittany to pay bills and payroll, memberships, investment of funds. You can see the rest of the list there. But it is just the standing authorizations for us to operate each year.
Questions? Comments? All right, take the roll, please.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Foreman?
Aye.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Foreman?
Aye.
So
Organizational
if
meetings.
Mr. Janice is watching, I will make a comment that that was the smoothest organizational meeting we've ever had in my 8 years. See if he's truly watching, if I get texted.
Although I did preside over 200 years.
Pretty good.
I improved with age. I guess. All right, so we'll move into the regular board meeting.
Yes.
Okay, welcome to the January 6th regular meeting of the Granville Exempted Village School District Board of Education meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and please stand for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Take roll, please.
Dr. Foreman?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Ms. Deeds?
Here.
Mr. Wolf?
Here.
Ms. Shaw?
Here.
Yeah. First item up is the approval of the agenda for tonight's meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Any additions or?
No, the only comment that I'd make is this is based on the new policy that you'll be approving later in the agenda. We just thought we'd start early.
And this was a suggested change to our agenda
Yes,
process.
And one slight tweak is that we have public comments twice now, following some community feedback that they might not want to stick around for, although it might be in the first half of the meeting of the board, staff reports and things like that. There's 2 opportunities. All those in attendance to make public comments as they so choose.
Yeah. Now they didn't even look up.
Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye. All right, so we are actually at the first opportunity to provide public comment. If anybody would like to address the board, please approach the podium, say your name and address, and you can speak for 3 to 5 minutes. Any takers? Nope. All right, moving on. Commendations.
Okay, so this is school board, the Ohio School Boards Association celebrating the School Board Recognition Month during January to build awareness and understanding the vital role an elected board member plays in our education and in our society. Granville Board of Education, like school boards across the state and country, provide critical leadership for our students, staff, and community. So you set the direction of our public schools by envisioning the community's educational future. You set its policies, procedures, and govern all aspects of the school district operation. School board keeps attention focused on progress towards the school district's goals and maintains two-way communication with all segments of the community. On behalf of the students, staff, and of Granville Exempted Village School District, we want to thank you for your service, for your about-to-be service through this recognition. So that's kind of the formal. Now I'm going to go off script. So you can see that Jim would love this poster. It says planting seeds of success, and it's School Board Recognition Month. But I think it's also kind of symbolic of what we've been doing here, which is really redefining success as a school district. From identifying a new mission, creating a new portrait of a graduate, looking at our instructional practices like project-based learning, we really have, and the Plan Lab has been one of those kind of hallmark scenarios or educational experiences that our students experience that kind of plant that seed of success. So along with that comes a notion of continuous improvement. And we've talked about how do you develop a continuous improvement mentality. And it's something that we believe is cultural within Granville Exempted Village School District. And in order to have a culture of continuous improvement, you have to have curiosity. And you have to ask the right questions about your organization and how we do our business in order to be successful in that continuous improvement process. And so our leadership team has been reading a book called A More Beautiful Question, okay, by Wernberger. And it's the power of inquiry to spark breakthrough ideas. And actually, Ryan and I got this book when we were visiting the Columbus Museum of Art. And Cindy Foley, who is their Director of Teaching and Learning at the Museum of Art, said, you need to read this book. And it really, it's a book full of questions and doesn't necessarily provide answers, but we know all questions don't have answers. So, especially essential ones. So, we wanted to give you and offer you this book as a gift for your service to this community. I can't tell you how lucky we feel to be led by this team. We have been very, very lucky for my tenure, which is almost 9 years now, and beyond, for the leadership that the board has provided through tough times and positive times. But the true, character of a board comes out when they're challenged and there's difficult times. And you've done very well weathering that storm, but also holding this board and this community to a higher ideal. So congratulations and thank you very much sincerely. So Cecile's not used to this, but I actually write you a little note at the beginning. Don't read each other's because they're exactly the same. All right, Thomas? Yeah.
Thank you.
I am very excited about the future of the schools with our new board for 2020. And thank you again on behalf of everybody watching and for those present here tonight. I also have your President's certificate from the school board. So I'll pass those out as well. Thank you very much.
School board?
School Board Association, sorry.
Thank you very much. I'm done here.
We've already
You-
completed one.
You
You've completed one.
should be proud.
That's good. Staff reports?
Yes?
All right, December financial report. So we're halfway through the fiscal year. Yay. On page 2, this is the summary of the fiscal year to date. So expenditures just for December exceeded revenue by about 1.9 million, but on the year to date, expenditures exceeded revenue by a little over $150,000. So that's primarily due to the timing of our property tax payments. With that coming twice a year, it kind of throws off the year-to-date numbers when you look at it in here. Flipping over to page 3 is the general fund revenue detail. So similar to last month, we primarily only collected state revenue this month and student fees, but we are at 48.85% collected. So halfway through the year, that's right on point where we would expect to be. And then flipping over to page 4 is the general fund expenditure detail. So to date, we are, compared to the forecast, at 49.99%. So I think Mike Sobel would be proud of us. So I'm
I
happy
second
with
that.
So that's good. But I mean, we did just revise the forecast in November, so we would expect to be right on target at this point through the year. Flipping over to page 5 is an update of the capital budget to actual. And this is just an update from last month. We had the theater lift, the requisition was put in place for that, as well as the signage at the high school. So those are under the outstanding encumbrances column now. And we are at 72% of the total budget for actuals and expenditures for the year. So flipping over then to page 6. Like I mentioned last month, this shows all of our funds, combination of what we've actually spent and what's encumbered. And for those funds that don't spend out at an even rate throughout the year, those are at either the higher end or the lower end of this sliding scale. So the classroom facility maintenance fund, the building fund, permanent improvement, those are all at the higher end because those are primarily summer projects that we've already spent. And then some of the lower ones are grants that we just haven't spent yet or are spent later on in the year. So a majority of our funds are right around 50%, with the exception of those that I noted. So we are on track there as well. And then just the cash reconciliation for the month on page 7. Are there any other questions or comments? I will note that next month we will have the either a supplement or a separate report for the athletic complex project. We have not had significant expenditures yet there, so it's given us some time to work through the internal accounting process and how we best want to display that to the board and to the public, so we'll have that for you next month.
Straightforward. Any other questions? Thank you.
So sorry. I wake you up. I wanted to, did I leave the clicker over there? Or I want it going? All right. I wanted to take the opportunity to give you an update on the Student Wellness and Success Fund strategic plan. And the rationale for why we're going to take the approach that we're taking related to that fund and those expenditures. So with House Bill 166, which is the biennial budget, there were an additional allocation for student wellness and success funds that were dedicated for that exact purpose. It was outside of the funding formula, very intentionally, because as you know, we were flat funded. The only requirement that it has is that you develop a plan. So I'm going to walk you backwards, but also align it from a historical perspective, but also from some of the work that we've been doing for the benefit of our board member and for everyone. So, well, actually, let's start here. We started with a rebranding of our mission statement almost 4 years ago, where we started talking about learning for life, really broadening that definition of success. And when you broaden the definition of success, obviously the social and emotional health and well-being of our students comes to the forefront. So we believe that this is actually the start of the conversation around student wellness and success, because it's broadening the definition of success to really life, not just about college admissions. In Granville schools, we like to take our rigorous academic content and combine it with 21st century skill sets to get at deep learning. We represent those competencies in our portrait of a graduate that was adopted at the beginning of this school year. This school year, our teaching staff have been unpacking the competency standards and really delving into, what do we mean when we say they're collaborative, okay? What do we mean when we say that they're empathetic or responsible? And really building that shared understanding of those competencies across K-12. As you know, we tend to do things K-12 because we think it's important for something that starts in kindergarten to come to fruition by 12th grade. So we have those definitions. They are working on those, and then we embedded them into our historical artifact of the Learning Foundations, which has been in place for almost 9 years. Again, the intersection of curriculum, assessment, and instruction to get at the heart of student learning, and done in a 21st century context with these competencies, elevating that inner Venn diagram. So curriculum is what we want students to know and be able to do. Assessment is how we know if they've met that objective, and then the instruction is how we do that. How do we get students to obtain that mastery of content? And then also, through the instruction, how do we build those competencies that are in the 21st century skill sets? So how does all that relate to our portrait of, or our student wellness and success funds? Well, as we started to look almost 8 years ago with the development of the whole child committee, started looking at exit surveys and OES data. At that time, it was Pride survey data, and now OES data. We were looking at, are we a well-rounded educational institution 8 years ago? 3 years ago, the Board of Education identified a well-being task force. And that task force looked at specific areas. I'm going to reference them in a few slides. But this Board of Education and previous boards of education in Granville have always looked for the opportunities to create a holistic education for our students. Not just the academics, but a healthy blend. This is language directly from the Student Wellness and Success Funds. We have to partner with either mental health services, child welfare, community liaisons, ESCs, mentoring programs in our, well, these are what we can pay for, okay? It has to fall into one of those categories. We have to partner with one of these groups, the role of the partnership. But what I think the governor is trying to do, and I agree with him, is not just use these funds to cover something that we're currently doing. They're really looking for these funds to be something that maybe is a catalyst for providing a service that we haven't provided before. So when you look at what we have listed here as far as opportunities, and then here related to partnerships, you'll see how this plan starts to come together with some of our previous work.
The state doesn't require the funds to flow through departments, do they?
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
They just say you create the plan and you do it in coordination with one of our partners.
Yes. Yeah, what they're trying to do is, build a system of wraparound services. I think that's ultimately the goal. And in many school districts, especially in large urbans, they have a lot of wraparound services connected to their school districts. So what they're trying to do is maybe codify that a little bit more in this type of policy language. So previous action research performed by the Wellbeing Task Force, we looked at what are the school conditions that contribute or amplify the well-being of our students. What's the impact of social media? How do our parents' understanding of the current environment and all the things going on in their parenting skill set feel about the well-being of their students? Behavioral health, looking at what are things that are happening with our students related to behavioral health. Prevention and suicide policy. If you remember, we actually adopted a policy. So what I wanted to do is kind of talk a little bit about those, and then at the very end, I put new to this equation are the SEL standards. So this, also this summer, the State Board of Education adopted the social emotional learning standards. So I'm going to connect all of these dots at some point, and if I don't, please ask that question, how do they connect, okay? So related to school conditions, you've heard Matt talk a little bit about some of the things that they've done in his building, but you probably heard it in several of the building principal presentations. We've done things like introduce calm classroom moments, where we're intentionally building in a few minutes of quiet time to get kids centered to help, address some of the stress and anxiety. We've had no homework weekends. We have started to look at other areas within our school structure and day that help or detract from student well-being. So we've done some of those things already. Within social media, we addressed a cell phone policy change in our handbook last year, where we said phones come out only during non-instructional times unless indicated by the staff member if they're going to use them. Because we now have Chromebooks that all students can use for their educational purposes. Because what we were intentionally trying to do is give them time away from their phone. Because sometimes that can be something that is driving anxiety, not just about the school, but that there's literally no pressure or no release from the pressure of social issues that are taking place. I think one of the things that the whole child committee spent a lot of time, and Travis Morris was very helpful in creating those well-being notes, which were really designed for parents and social media. Really thinking about what are we wanting to message to our parents that help them build awareness of some of the positives and negatives of social media. When we get into the parenting lens, we really haven't done as much as I think we should. And I'm going to talk personally. My senior in college grew up in the cell phone age, okay? It was a part of her life, but it wasn't as significant of a factor in her development as my 10th grade. What has changed in that 6 years is, in my mind, challenging. Because what was true when Emily was going through school and what's true about social media and the role of technology now, with Lily, it's very different. And quite honestly, I had to adjust my expectations and think about things differently because the technology has changed so rapidly. Sometimes you don't even know what you don't know. And so I think we need to do a better job of supporting our parents in that learning process because quite honestly, most parents are digital immigrants, not digital natives, just like us. Now, some of our parents, especially at the elementary, are much more savvy than we are. But I think it's important for us to provide that level of support for our parents because it's not about, hey, we're in a good school district, we're good parents. It's about, do you really understand the context of raising a child in this type of environment now? The other aspect of this that I would talk about is we live in a high achievement culture, okay? Granville specifically has the demographics of high achievement. That can come with positives and negatives when you think of child development. And when research articles are coming out that high achieving cultures are the next at-risk subgroup, it's recognition that that culture can be positive and it can be toxic depending on where your child is at in that culture. So we want to be able to help parents navigate some of those conversations. And I think there are some great research and texts out there to support parents in just bringing that conversation to the forefront. Behavioral health, the recommendation from that committee was very clear. We believe that we need a professional that is a bridge between what our school counselors can do and what the outside providers can do. So that was their recommendation, but at the time, we had just failed the levy, so that got tabled. It's always been resource dependent. Now we have resources allocated from the state for that specific purpose, and you'll see in our plan where we think we're going to head. And then our prevention policy, and I can include prevention policy also in capacity building. We do a lot of professional development with our staff to help build their understanding of these topics. We completed a suicide prevention policy in the spring of 2018. Kate Guiney was our student representative that really drove that policy change, which was fantastic. We've partnered with Nationwide Children's Hospital on the signs of suicide training. We've done that training 7 through 12. We have held a parent night this year. And we are working on the consistent documentation internally to support students between buildings if they are at a mental health crisis. And then we have programs like ROCKS and other things, Too Good for Drugs, that are a part of our prevention orientation. And then capacity building, I referenced that. We have our PBIS, which is our Positive Behavioral Intervention System. That is PACS, the PACS Good Behavior Game, which you think PACS is very elementary, but it actually has room to stretch. I mean, Mr. Durst implements PACS up at the high school in the PACS Good notes. What are they called?
Taxes.
Taxes, thank you. So it's about using positive intervention to help support and build a culture around that positivity. I mentioned Too Good for Drugs and the signs of suicide training. I think 2 recommendations also from the committee were to look at trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive instruction or trauma-informed environments, and also cultural competence. So those are, again, areas where you'll see in a minute how we believe we need to build those. But what I want to do is take these and then connect them to the new SEL framework. A lot of language up there, but I want to call your attention to self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making, and then take you back to that. There is a lot of synergy and connection to our competencies articulated in this framework. So what we're gonna do is what we do with any new curriculum. We unpack it. We unpack it to make sure that we all have a very similar understanding of the skill sets or the outcomes that we desire. Once we unpack it, then we are able to then embed it into our curriculum. And we believe that SEL is not something that just a guidance counselor or a school counselor does, but we believe a physics teacher can do that up at the high school. We believe, a kindergarten teacher can do that. We believe every staff member has to have a role in developing the social and emotional learning of our students.
What's the origin of this? What's Castle in 2017?
So Castle was the researcher that put together the SEL framework, and it's an organization that really has driven the social and emotional learning network
At a national
at
level?
a national level. Yep.
And are there similar adaptations in other states and so forth?
I would say he's probably the most referenced researcher related to social and emotional learning. And so a lot of the work that the School Counselors Association references is also related to Castle's work.
For years, just to add, I mean, this for years.
Yes.
That's been the case.
Yeah. So again, the connection to the SEL will also be something that we embed into our 5-year plan. One of the things that I like to kind of, okay, it's over.
You're learning this time.
Glenn, we might need to punt, but so what I wanted to do was just kind of tie the SELs to the competencies and then move forward into the timeline. So really the first year of our timeline of year 1 is 2020, 2021, because some of the work that we're going to need to do is going to be in preparation for that. So if you look at some of the outcomes that we expect to achieve in year 1, we want to have that partnership with the mental health provider to have in-house services for our students solidified. I anticipate that either in February or March, I'm going to be bringing to you as an action item a contractual relationship with an outside provider to provide those mental health services within our district. With it really looking like there's an established office that a person can, that is something that the outside provider builds within our building, and then they can provide or use insurance, private insurance of the parent. We have the benefit of most of our parents having private insurance, so that would start with a referral and a consultation and then potentially get into direct work with the student. But then really the goal is to then transition that student to an outside provider, more of a bridge than a sustained person to work daily with a student. But at the same time, we want that person also working with our staff members to build their capacity to recognize signs of trauma, to deal with trauma that is already present in a better way so that it doesn't escalate. So all of that work will be done with that partnership. Unpacking of the SEL standards I just referenced in professional development time with staff. PBIS training, there is now a requirement for us to provide PBIS training K through 12 every 3 years. So we have done this training multiple times. We actually have elementary teachers that are train the trainers. So they will be doing some of that training in the upper grades, but we have to provide that training to every single employee once every 3 years. That is in current law. So what you'll see is that we are going to create a system or a cycle of professional development that rotates every 3 years, and you'll see that. And then the identified school condition, what I want to say about that is in less than a month, I have a student that is working on an action research project for his global studies program, and he is going to create focus groups for me to interact with the students to talk about what are the school conditions that impact stress and anxiety or their ability to cope with things during the school day. So we have some ideas of things that we want to pursue. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about homework. I think that's something that we can talk about continuing that conversation. But we will have an identified school condition in each year that we're going to elevate and illuminate. In year 2, to the professional development that we'll offer is around trauma-informed instruction training and CPI. CPI is the restraint training that we have to provide as well. But we feel like those go hand in hand because what trauma-informed instruction does is try and de-escalate students before it gets to an elevated state. But once it does, it goes to CPI, which is the restraint training. So we wanted to kind of tag those together because they are related. There are several organizations out there that do great training around trauma-informed environments, so we're going to try and do that. Embed the SEL standards into curriculum expectations K through 12. Again, we can do that once we've unpacked. And then looking at the parent academy or book study, and then another identified school condition. Anything that we've done strategically, we've done over time with a focus. So that's what we're doing. You'll see it. This is a 3 to 5 year plan. It gets less granular as we move through because I want to give us the opportunity to adjust based on feedback. In year 3, we'll focus on cultural competency training. We have a great relationship with a person up on Denison who actually, might be related to a board member, who has been willing to partner and have conversations with us. We also have some parent volunteers that I think will be helpful in satisfying that professional development. So if you think of PD, we're going to allocate about 20% of our professional development time annually towards this plan, okay? Because we still have all the other professional development that we're either required to do or that we want to do, like project-based learning, that still is a priority to us. So it goes PBIS, trauma-informed, cultural competency, then you'll see PBIS training resurface, trauma-informed, and then you'll see identified school condition in each one of the years of the plan. So those really connect not only to what was referenced in these well-being task force, but also in the conversation around the portrait of graduates. So hopefully you start to see the through line between ideal and practical application and strategic implementation. Obviously, we will monitor this to see how well we're doing as a Board of Education around this initiative. Some of this information will be part of the State of the Schools address that Matt provides. And we're going to be looking at some of the data indicators that Matt highlighted to see if we can address some of those things. But when we create a parent academy, one of the topics could easily be not just social media, but sleep and the role of sleep and how important that is. So I wanted to kind of bring these together because I've seen these opportunities to connect these initiatives over time. What we're trying to do is build it into a system that makes sense, that can be an area of focus of the board, because I know that this is a priority. Some of the work will be done by a child committee. Some of the work will be done by outside professionals. We will create partnerships. The nice part of this is every school district is working on this now because they have to in order to allocate the funds. So we're having continued conversations about this. And I would say there are probably 11 school districts. Well, there are 11 school districts in Lincoln County, and all 11 of them are doing it a little differently. And I think that's exactly the intent, is to match, what your school district has as issues with your plan. And I think we've done a good job with that so far. So, what questions, concerns? This is your opportunity to ask questions, but you can also discuss it in board discussion. Any questions?
What's the funds that are available from the state for wellness? What's that total budget?
We have $1 million, no, I'm just kidding. $94,000 in the first year, and I believe it's $153,000 in year 2. but they don't have to be spent in that calendar year or even, there is no sunset, so to speak, on when you have to spend those dollars. So we're actually slowing this process down and extending it a little bit so that we can maximize those dollars.
And again, not to say that that's the budget that we should have as a school district, but just kind of curious where those funds are coming in. And how do you kind of anticipate that our spending will be allocated between staff member that serves as a bridge and so forth, and the other elements of the plan that you're rolling out?
So I think for the most part, at the beginning of this process, you're going to see a heavier spend on the actual personnel. But what we're trying to do is create a sustainable program if and when those dollars do evaporate, even though the governor has committed that they won't. He really doesn't have control over that. So what we're trying to do is create a plan that once the person is in place and they build a caseload that can be augmented by private pay, that we get to reduce the amount of money that we're actually spending towards that person's salary. But we will always keep a certain allocation because part of their job is going to be that capacity building of the rest of the staff. So they're going to be serving as a resource without the ability to necessarily direct pay or direct bill. So sustainability, but there's also going to be opportunities for material purchases. If we want to create book studies and things like that, we can use these funds to purchase books or training materials. That's what we'll do.
As there's a kind of a long list of potential things that we could do, and I don't know if those are things that we need to spend on, but they're probably things we certainly need to spend time on. How we carve that out of what individuals in the organization and what other external resources we can bring in for the parent competency building and for the other evaluations of our facilities and so forth. It seems like there's a lot to be done here, and I don't know kind of how it's allocated or funded necessarily, but it's a part of your time.
Yeah.
It's a part of a lot of different individuals' times, as it sure should be. I'm not sure how you allocate the finances to that to sort of justify it or try as much as
And I think, what we know about great professional development is when teachers talk to teachers, that is the best professional development that you could ever have and pay for. I think the same is true when parents talk to other parents around difficult topics. So, the more we leverage those opportunities, we can create the environment and convene. But then really the power is when, this parent is talking to this parent and they have similar situations and they look at research and they leverage that, which isn't necessarily a lot of money allocation, it is time. It's time intensive, but I think some of that work we're already doing and we can build upon that.
It might be interesting to reach out to gaps and pace of the group there or something like that as well, to figure out how they might suggest we're kind of engaged in as well. I'm sure there's some members of those groups that are part of our committees and things like that, but it seems like we have a neat opportunity to fund some things or at least kind of reconvene in different ways, right, as a part of this. Seems like some momentum to make it happen.
Excellent. Yes.
So how does this overlap with existing personnel? For instance, we have a school psychologist, right?
Right.
So how is this different, and does it take away from what the school psychologist does, or?
They will be a part of kind of the overall team, but really a school psychologist role, you can't think of them in the traditional sense of a psychologist, but really they do a lot of the evaluation team reports for IEPs. So they're really performing assessments and protocols for that ETR process that really drives special education. But they do have a resource they are still a resource for us. They are heavily involved in our RTI model, the response to intervention model. So they will be a part of this because they are definitely an asset. But when you talk about direct service to a student in crisis, that is not necessarily going to be something that person would be involved in, but the provider that we bring in would be.
And do we see this person at the middle school, high school, or is it somebody who will have that?
They will be housed most likely at middle school, high school, but they will have the ability to impact capable.
And how might Because I wonder, like, could this change the role of, or the responsibilities of our counselors as well? I feel like their job has just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And is this also an opportunity maybe to take a look and see what they're doing? Can it be restructured, or different models of the counseling department that might, again, work in terms of, I don't know, but I was just,
I think, and I use the language bridge intentionally, because school counselors can take their level of training and expertise to a point, and then really they do need to release that responsibility to a different provider. So that bridge is really meant to ensure kind of continuation of service, so that, a person doesn't drop before they get to the provider that can help them. So there might be some conversation so that we have really seamless services or a continuum of services available. Some redefinition might occur, but I really believe that some of these are going to be, the lanes are going to be defined, as appropriate for their training. I mean, Matt, would you agree with that, or is that something, because a lot of the work that they do is related to this, but it's also a lot of other things too.
well, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying, right, is that,
Yeah.
again, they've become, academic counselors and socio-emotional counselors and, training staff counselors and, so forth and so on. And so, their job is just so big. And very important, yeah, I'm not diminishing their role, but I'm just wondering if this is an opportunity to also look at that position, and are there different ways that we can, use them? I don't know if there's a way that, like, some counselors are more the academic people and some are more the socio-emotional, and so we divide things by, sort of caste rather than the students in alphabet, or, is this an opportunity just to even take a look to see if what we're doing is.
And here's, I think the overall theme for this is the more people we train to recognize and intervene, the better off all kids will be. And so taking that holistic approach, because we know great learning occurs when you have a significant relationship. And all kids need a significant relationship, whether it's peer-to-peer or adult. And we actually look at that metric because we want students to have a significant relationship, a go-to person. And so we want to make sure that we cover a wide group and then specialize with the people who have that training over time. But I agree with you. Like, I would say yes, and we just don't know yet how far we can go.
Okay.
So,
I guess I would say let's take a look and
Yeah.
and see what other models are out there. And what we have may be great, and it may be the most efficient. It may be because I can see sort of separating things, but then also having one person sort of know a student really well being the model that we want. But I just thought since we're sort of
yeah. Well, and I think the other piece that this person can provide is if we have them on staff for multiple years, they are that consistent person that can track a kid through buildings where other personnel might transition. That person can say, hey, this is what was successful here. Think about the implementation. So that transition issue, which is a big gap issue, that's what GAPS talks about, is that transition from one provider to the next or one teacher to the next. That's a challenge. I think that we can try and smooth those transitions out.
Something that's going on in the behavioral health world is trying to create what they call no wrong door. So wherever you go into a group, we can get you into whatever service you need. And I think this sounds like the same kind of approach. So if they go to a guidance counselor, if we adding a professional in that just enhances that you can get the services you need. And I really like the idea of the more that are trained to recognize things, even though it might not be their expertise, but they can say, hey, we can get this done, and this is how we can do it. And so the more opportunity, I think it's a great approach to take.
How do you think teachers teachers and staff are feeling about this opportunity? Are they excited, or does it feel like, oh no, this is one more thing?
So I worry that this, I mean, to be honest, we feel like that. Even just trying to fit it into the professional development, that, we have limited windows of time. So I'm sure that some staff will say, oh my gosh, that's why we're trying to link it to other aspects of the plan that we've been doing already, so that it doesn't look like something new and massive, but really show them a plan that is very well thought out and also embedded into the professional development that they have to do already. When you think about a teacher, just to do the mandatory trainings that we have to do on public school works, which is, the tool that we use, it's 4 hours of training if you just do the minimum of what's legally required. So we have 5 days of professional development. Some of that's eaten up in the convocation, some of that's done through, or utilized for preparing classrooms. So some of that is already spoken for. So we really have about 2.5 to 4 days of time where we're building capacity and giving them opportunities to learn and implement. And so I think it's our job to try and match pressure with support. But what's unique about this opportunity is that I think this gets at the heart of why people become teachers. They really care about kids. And so this aligns with a lot of the things that they already probably personally believe. It's just building their capacity to do them in alignment with some of the research. So my hope is that we help shrink the learning curve and embed it and connect it to previous work.
Yeah, I think in connecting all of the social emotional learning to cultural competencies, I think that will also
Yeah.
help. There's so many links there.
Absolutely. I don't know why this won't let me power off.
Well, it won't let you power off because the fan's trying to cool it off.
Oh, okay.
It's a lose-lose situation.
Kill the power.
Okay, a little yellow message, you didn't take the hint.
No, I just kept going. Power through.
So we have reached the second point on the agenda where we will entertain public comment. Same rules apply. Anybody interested? No? Okay, moving on to board discussion. We don't have a specific topic, but we can continue our discussion of what Brown just presented on student wellness and any other issues related to student wellness. Or if there is a particular issue that anybody would like to raise, we can entertain that as well.
Could you dispense with the mood lighting?
Yes.
I don't know, Russ, we need to see it.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Well, every time I hear something about a new curriculum from the state, I cringe,
Yeah.
right? Because they're usually not funded and not relevant. But in this case, I'm excited, right? Mostly because of the fact that they'll tell so much what we've already been doing and what we've wanted to do for so long, right? So I think the more that we can, fit it to our portrait of a graduate, instead of us trying to fit our portrait of a graduate to it,
Yeah.
right? And continue sort of on the mission in the ways that we have with the support of the state, which is fantastic, right? But also not constrained by that budget or that direction of their list of bullet points and things like that, but continue in the way that we've always wanted to. I think that's the way we need to go with this. So, but there's a lot more down there, right? And, it's like every time you have another initiative or another thing and so forth, right? You worry about diluting and you just think about what the impact's going to be to the staff. So it's great that we have some resources coming in to help, but we need to think carefully about that time allocation to ensure that our other priorities are still maintained.
Institution after all.
Yeah.
Yeah. But these are, I mean, again, I don't mean to, belittle the importance of these issues as well, but at some point, I mean, how much can we sustain? And
Or are there other resources we can pull? Can we spend some funds on some other consultant to come in, right, that can do programs for parents? Or can we bring a consultant in that's a social media expert? Like maybe we should have if we're concerned about social media use, maybe we should have somebody that comes in and we spend funds on that. I'm not sure how that would cost or how to do that. But
Well,
maybe there's a way to utilize those funds in other creative ways to kind of take a load off of us to some extent.
and I think the partnership side of that equation, if we wanted to partner with the 11 other school districts, I mean, let's be honest, every forum that we've ever held, we could probably combine all of them into one night and not fill our auditorium. So if, let's say, we partnered with Heath and Licking Valley and Newark and held it at, the Reese Center at OSU, and we chipped in dollars to support somebody coming in that's an expert in talking to parents. I mean, I think that would be something that would maximize dollars and maybe shrink the cost for them. So I think those are the.
That's a great idea. I think it also really culturally connect us in a way, because a lot of the regional issues and things like that, and I think in the perspective of the different folks in the room and things like that, would be really great. And maybe that's an effective way to do this. So I'm excited about this.
Borley Taylor at OSU and is their diversity and inclusion person, and she does a lot of great work. And I think, between Borley and Vivi, we have two great resources to tap into when we're looking at cultural competence. We also have some parents with some expertise as well.
at OSBA, Dublin City Schools and Nolan Panji presented, and they had done a combined program, a year-long program on suicide awareness and prevention. And I mean, I took some serious notes, but it was a really interesting model, I thought, and they actually had an amazing turnout. I mean, they had probably had, and now they're huge school districts also, but they probably had like upwards of 500 people attend the sessions, and they had sort of, mini sessions during the year, and then it all culminated in a weekend-long kind of thing. It was a lot of work,
Sure.
but they felt it was very successful. But I was intrigued by the idea of two school districts getting together to address, the issue and combine resources. And they learned they didn't have to necessarily provide as much food as they,
Right.
those kinds of things. But it seemed like it was really interesting. So if we again want to, have a model for partnering with other school districts, and I think one of the people who was introduced him to me when we were at OSBA. So you want to reach out.
There are some of those larger organizations, having come from one, they have people assigned to those tasks.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice when, that's their entire job, that you can tap into that resource and say, tell me all the latest, and then how can we scale it to, Granville, which is 2,500 students versus 22,000 in Old P&G, and, almost, well, slightly less than that in Dublin. I mean, when you talk about Dublin and Old P&G, you're talking close to 35,000 students in Dublin.
In that context, maybe there's a resource that's collaborative amongst local Licking County districts where we can't afford to full-time somebody that works on some aspect of it. Maybe there's a great opportunity for cooperation.
And I think we'll find, and I think Jeff's found, that there's a lot of organizations and groups within the county that are willing to collaborate. And
LAP has been fantastic, Behavioral Health Partners, Ohio Guidestone, Boundless, Mental Health of America.
And I think this is something LMH, especially if we did something in association with other school districts, would really get involved with, whether it be as a sponsor or as a resource or both. But especially if we did it with some other school districts. So I think one of the things people don't realize about Licking County is the organizations that are here, especially dealing with a lot of behavioral health issues and things. And we're lucky to have Denison and OSU, and I think there's a lot of resources here. It's just, like you said, I can't think of really any district in the county that has that point person that can do that, so maybe working collaboratively, we can pull something together.
I completely agree, and I think really the ESC can be a great point because they have contractual relationships with every school district in Licking County. We've been talking with Dale, you know, to how can he leverage his connection to all of us to bring some of those services together. Because we pay for academic services through the ESC all the time. So more opportunities, continuing conversations.
Okay, moving on to the action, board reports. We don't have any specific reports listed. Does anybody have anything they want to say?
I just, to update the board, I attended the Granville Sports Hall of Fame induction on Saturday. Very well attended, a terrific class that went in. I thought Josh Duvall did a great job along with, he identified some volunteers. And it was a very nice reception at Cherry Valley Lodge. And as I said, it was a really good class that they inducted, and a nice event. I mean, it's always been a nice event, but I think people like the idea of being kind of out of the school, and just, it was a good social opportunity. People got to stay, mix and mingle afterwards, and some, you know, there was a diversity in age and things there. It was just a really good event. It was a good event.
Lisa, and I don't know if you guys realize this, but Lisa and Jerry Miller were inducted into the Hall of Fame together. And so that was, it was really nice. It was nice. And it's kind of fun now because I'm starting to get into the group of kids that I know, you know. So Casey Gladfest and Rachel Holt, so
Courtney Moyer,
yeah,
Zach Lillywin, and
yeah, Zach,
Jamie Katz.
yeah. So
And John Dalton, who was a former soccer coach. So it was a good class.
but I would agree
Good
with
event.
Fred. It was a nice event, very well organized by Josh and his team. If we would have beat Valley instead of losing in the last second, it would have been fantastic.
And as just as an aside, the athletic boosters fund that event too. So it's a good collaboration. And it was, I think it's really good having some former or inducted, they're already members that wanted to get involved. And Josh also got a lot of leadership from like the G Club student athletes that were greeters, both at the game where they're introduced and at the event beforehand. So it was very nicely done.
Anything else? Okay, action agenda?
Okay, item 12.01 is approval of the resolution opposing the State of Ohio Ed Choice Scholarship Program.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so the Ed Choice Program, in conference committee during the legislative or budget process, they expanded that program where any school district that has any building that has an F on the local report card in any area is now Ed Choice eligible. And what that has done is taken that pot of our group of school districts from around, 80 to about 500. And because we all know how high quality our local report card is, it doesn't make sense that something, driving educate or public dollars to other entities is based off of that document. Makes no sense whatsoever. So it's a bad policy. It was done not in the light of day. I think the legislature should be ashamed of themselves, quite honestly. And I think it's important for every school district in the state of Ohio to pass a similar resolution and send a message. Now, it sounds like Householder and the governor both agree that a change is necessary because they've been getting significant pushback. The scholarship eligibility opens February 1. That's why there's some urgency to this, but they will have to we'll have to have an emergency clause to any potential legislation. But as soon as you pass this resolution, we'll send that on to our representatives that pass it so that they can get it to all of the appropriate people that we are inundating with this message.
Is it not also based on data from like 2-3 years ago? In a
Yeah,
period
and
where-
once you're in for good. There is no out.
Are you kidding?
No, I'm not kidding. Yep.
So like, and isn't it also that period when people were not supposed to be held
There was a safe harbor.
safe harbor?
Yeah.
And they're using data from that period?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. It's wrong on every level,
I don't remember.
let alone separation of church and state. So, just saying.
Okay. Any other questions or comments about the resolution? Okay, take the roll, please.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Thank you. Board policy adoption, we have two, the agenda format and preparation and dissemination policies.
So moved.
Second.
And really, we just modeled what we were intending on changing anyway, so nothing more to communicate.
And is it correct also to, like, because I called Dave for, that's where we would announce any amendments for
Yes.
any changes, like, so we set the agenda by Friday, and if there's anything that comes up that we have to amend, that's where we're.
Yes. So basically, if we have an addendum, we would say we approve the agenda and the addendum as attached.
Any other questions or comments? Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Dr. Corman?
Aye.
12.03 is the approval of the change order for Robinson Construction.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so the change order, the way the construction process works is there's a bid document that goes out to bid. They bid on that document. There's a certain amount that, they come in as from the bid document. And that bid document, once you secure the construction manager, goes out to permit. And once the permitting comes back, there are change orders that need to take place. This is the large one after the bid process. It's $105,000. It was higher than that, and we adjusted down as much as we can that isn't necessarily required. So there's only one thing that would say in this change order that is really meant to help save money in the long run from a soil stabilization standpoint, but isn't permitted or isn't required from a permitting standpoint. But we feel like if we spend a little now, we'll save more in the stabilization process. Accurate?
Do you know where the difference came from? Like, or is it just sort of kind of across the project?
It's across the project. It can be from HVAC to sewer and water, you name it. One perfect example is water lines where we were going to connect. The village wanted us to connect in a different location, and it basically doubled the water line. So, I don't disagree with their thought process. It makes sense. It just wasn't in the plan.
Any other questions or comments? Take the roll, please.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Thank you. 12.04, storage roof replacement.
So moved. Second.
Okay, I chuckle because I've been wanting to address this eyesore for a long time. And this is one of the things that has been deferred from a maintenance standpoint since I've been here. But it is it used to be the old locker room for the Burkhart field, and it is at the entrance of the elementary school. We're gonna replace that roof, power wash and repaint that facility. We'll probably repaint in the spring, but we're going to actually get that building functional. The bones are good. We just need to get it functional and not have a porous environment above us, so that we can house some of our equipment and material.
So we can actually use it for storage?
So we can actually use it for storage.
Imagine.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it needs a whole lot more than a roof though, right?
Yes.
It really a whole lot of
Yeah.
issues and so forth. Is this
We've done a lot
budgetary
already.
item for the entire project, or is this solely for the?
That's solely for the roof, but there are aspects to inside that have already been addressed within our general annual budget. So we're really just trying to get it to that point where, but all the things that we have done inside, we don't want to ruin because of that.
And the rest of the expenses you anticipate, I say it number four is because if there's like painting.
Yeah. Yeah, probably.
They don't involve significant capital expenditure.
Correct. This also includes gutters and downspouts, which will help our neighbor in the red house. It used to be, Darren is a C-Tech teacher in visual art, and
Oh, yeah.
Kennedy, Darren Kennedy. He sold that home, but he used to have flooding in his basement regularly because of our roof line. So that sewer area right next to his house would not be able to handle that flow. So we'll be able to direct our water different ways so it doesn't impact the neighbor.
Yeah, it looks almost not refurbishable, but maybe I haven't been in it or whatever.
It's, the concrete shell is
Okay.
pretty decent. And the pad is not as bad as we thought.
Just keep the water out.
That's right.
Gotta keep your water. Yep.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thanks, roll please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Dees?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Dr. Foreman?
Aye.
Thank you. Approval of consent agenda item A through C.
So moved. Second.
I call your attention to a couple of the donations. Obviously, archery is, receiving several donations again. But I would also recognize John Golovic and Julie Hout, who are, John was a former board member, reached out when he saw the messaging around the athletic complex and said, is there something that I can do to help some of the programs that my child benefited from? And so my children benefited from. So he donated $4,000, which was really nice. Former board member, so thank you. And I'd also like to, call attention to Caleb Slavinsky, who completed the National Board Certification process. We'll probably have Caleb come to a future meeting to commend him for that process. Mike and Ryan can both attest to the National Board Certification process. It's pretty rigorous. It's a good thing. And it's really helps the teacher refine their craft.
Hey, thanks to John and Julie for the contribution that they're giving and things like that. It's wonderful that we have folks in the community that are willing to step up and do things like this, and my sense is it's just probably more like that out there. Right? And I'm not sure how to funnel or encourage or help or direct or connect with those individuals. And I'm hopeful that the GEF can find a way to reach out in creative ways and so forth. And I'm not sure whether these directed funds are their mission currently, but maybe that's something we can take back to GEF and point out that there might be additional capacity out there for unique kinds of fundraising or contributions that we can connect with the community. So,
We always love donations.
yeah, that's great. And I think, that's a huge financial contribution.
Yeah,
That's really outstanding. But I think it's also really important that, just the awareness it brings and the connection that it brings with those individuals that we can reach out to and connect to, and the awareness that it shows for us. So that's really wonderful.
Any other comments or questions? Thanks, roll please.
Ms. Dees?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Foreman?
Aye.
Okay, item 14.01, the December 2019 financial statement.
So moved.
Second.
Any further questions, concerns, feedback?
Pretty straightforward. I mean, you're not surprised by anything or, yeah. Go ahead, roll.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Dees?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Dr. Foreman?
Aye.
Okay, item 14.02, the resolution accepting amounts and rates.
So moved.
Any
an annual resolution that the board has to approve prior to April. Once we receive the values and tax rates from the county auditor, the next step is for you to approve them, and then they send them back to the county auditor for finalization. Just a couple things to note. This is where we see the impact of the inside millage, the final component of the inside millage swap. So there was 1.5 mils that went from general fund that's now in permanent improvement. So taxpayers won't see a decrease because of that, but we'll see the impact on the revenue side between funds. And then the second piece is the 1.7 mil permanent improvement levy has fallen off. So that's a reduction for taxpayers by 1.7 mils. And the 0.5 mil classroom facilities maintenance levy also expired and fell off. So that's another 0.5 reduction as well. So
So that's the formalization of the commitment that we made for the reduction to fees during the last income tax term.
yes, this is where we see that impact.
Is there a way we can let the general public make them aware of that?
Yeah, that's great. I think we probably have an opportunity to do that. Our next newsletter would be an appropriate time for that.
We can also talk to Craig to see if he can.
I just think it's important that we lived up to what we said,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Promises made, promises kept.
Yeah.
And it's hard, I think, this document, comparison document from 18 to 19 really shows it pretty well, though I don't think as a taxpayer you would necessarily see it
Right.
clearly, so it's a good opportunity.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, we can reach out to Craig.
Anything else? Okay, take a motion.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye. Entertain a motion to move into executive session to consider the employment of a public employee or official.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Deeds? Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Corman?
Aye. And there will be no action taken after the executive session.